90-degree eccentric isometrics. Is it even possible to have an eccentric and an isometric occurring at the same time? According to my critics, it's not possible, but the science would suggest otherwise. Hey guys, Dr. Joel Seedman here. In today's video, I want to talk about what exactly is a 90-degree eccentric isometric. Now, in the last video, I highlighted my personal journey, how I came from traditional training methods and came across this 90-degree eccentric isometric protocol. But today we need to get a bit more detailed into the method. So with all of that in mind, the ultimate goal of the 90-degree eccentric isometric method is to perform the perfect repetition. That's the goal, that's the aim of it. And when we do that, we're trying to simultaneously eliminate muscle dysfunction, compensation patterns, any type of pain or discomfort in the body, and all this is going to bring healing and restoration of the body so that we can also train without being in pain and without injuring ourselves. So now I want to basically break down exactly what a 90-degree eccentric isometric would look like, and we'll use the squat as an example. So first, we'll perform the eccentric or the lowering / lengthening phase of the movement with a very slow controlled descent for roughly 3 to 5 seconds. During that time period, the quads will be stretched. Now, there's other muscles that will be stretched as well, but let's just focus on the quads to keep this simple. Now, once we perform that eccentric phase or that lowering phase, we'll then hold that bottom position, which will be roughly 90 degrees or the stretched position, for an additional 3 to 5 seconds. Again, those quads will be in that stretched position. We're then going to follow that with an explosive yet controlled concentric or lifting / driving up phase. And then we're going to repeat that entire sequence for the desired number of repetitions. Now, a lot of people will say that it's impossible to have an eccentric and an isometric occurring simultaneously. However, we just discussed that the lowering phase is the eccentric, and then we have the pause or the hold, which is the isometric. However, I want to discuss the isometric or the hold a little bit more and explain that we're not just passively holding it for the sake of holding it. What we're trying to do is we're actually trying to continuously lengthen the muscles as we're holding that 90-degree position. And the best way to illustrate this is with the bench press. So as we're holding that 90-degree position on the bench press, we're actually using our back muscles to stretch or pull into the position. We're not just passively holding that position. We're actively engaging or pulling or squeezing into that position as hard as we possibly can by using our opposing muscles, which in case of the bench press is the back and the lats. Think of this like a slingshot. In order to pull the sling back, I have to have a force or an external force that's pulling against the sling. Well, in the case of the bench press, my back is doing the same thing. I'm using those muscles to stretch the pectorals, or in the case of the slingshot, I'm pulling it back. That's what keeps the muscles elongated. Therefore, we have the term eccentric isometric. Now, a lot of individuals, when they perform movements in the weight room or do any type of strength training, they're often too loose. They're not maintaining full body tension. When we do any type of movement, particularly the 90-degree eccentric isometric method, we want maximal full body tension from head to toe. We don't want any areas of the body that are loose or leaking energy. We want everything to be braced. We want everything to be tight. One of the most pivotal parts about 90-degree eccentric isometrics and any movement in general, especially in the weight room, is we want to have perfect posture. Perfect posture starts with our head position. Our head needs to be tall and elongated. We don't want it compressed or slouching forward. From there, we want our shoulders to be pulled down and back while keeping our core braced and pulled in tight. These elements are absolutely critical because if you don't have perfect posture, everything breaks down and it's going to be impossible to perform any movement with perfect precision or control. One of the most common questions that I have on social media, people are always asking, well, how do you know if you found the right position? How do you know if you found 90 degrees? How do you know it wasn't too deep or it wasn't too shallow? Well, this is absolutely critical, and it actually goes back to posture and the full body tension components that we previously mentioned. If your posture is perfectly locked in, if you have maximal full body tension from head to toe, you want to find your first natural stopping point, which will actually be the deepest position you can achieve without sacrificing your posture and your alignment and your full body tension. That's when you know you found that optimal 90-degree position. We've talked a good amount about the eccentric phase. We've talked a good amount about the isometric or the hold. The concentric portion, which is the driving up or the pressing up phase of, say, the bench press or the squat. That phase is also very important. However, it should essentially naturally or automatically occur if, in fact, the eccentric and the isometric are locked in. We want the concentric to be as powerful as possible. But once again, it's back to that slingshot analogy. If the muscles are stretched properly from being in a good position and using our opposite muscles to co-contract, once we release that slingshot, it should aggressively and forcefully drive up. So that's the concentric phase on most of the movements. As I was doing my research during my PhD, one of the things that I came across was muscle spindles. And muscle spindles are these little feedback mechanisms that are embedded within our bigger muscles. We have them everywhere in our body. These feedback mechanisms basically give us information continuously about our sense of feel and our body positioning. Well, here's where the science on stretch comes in. When a muscle is stretched and when it has maximal tension and stiffness, again, this goes back to maintaining full body tension. When we have that stretch and stiffness, those muscle spindles are maximally engaged and it's giving us that high level of feedback and sense of feel. Now when I'm doing a squat or a bench press or a row or really any movement, I can feel where my body's at. I can sense if something's off. I can feel if I'm compensating. I can feel or attend to that extra information that I might not have normally had, or even attend to information that normally I would have relied on a coach or an external source of feedback to give me information about. Now, with the muscle spindles fully engaged, I can become my own coach. I can actually tune into what's going on with my body mechanics, and I can self-correct and I can fine-tune what's going on. This is absolutely critical for mastering movement because our body is continuously giving us this feedback. Even when it comes to pain, when we feel pain, that's our body telling us, hey, something's off, you're not in the right position, something's not optimally engaged, fix it. Fine tune it until it doesn't hurt. It's the same thing with our body positioning, and those muscle spindles are absolutely key. With the 90-degree eccentric isometrics, the whole purpose of getting into that 90-degree position and holding that isometric is so that we can have maximal activation of the muscle spindles so that we have that really high sense of feedback and that high sense of kinesthetic awareness or proprioception, which basically means sense of feel, because once we have that, we can master our movement. So how do you apply this 90-degree eccentric isometrics method to the weight room? Essentially, it can be applied to really any traditional movement, a squat, a hinge, a bicep curl, a shoulder press. However, with my athletes and clients, I like to use what I refer to as the big 7 or the fundamental 7 movement patterns. We have 3 for the lower body, which are the squat, the hinge, which would be like an RDL or a good morning, and then the lunge, which would be any type of split squat, lunge, or Bulgarian squat. Then we have the 4 for the upper body, which would be the horizontal push, something like a bench press. Then we have the horizontal pull, which would be a movement like a row. Then we have the vertical push or vertical press, which would be something like an overhead press or military press. And then finally, we have the vertical pull, which would be a movement like a lat pull down or a pull up. But the 90-degree eccentric isometric method can really be applied to any movement where there's a significant eccentric or lengthening phase, as long as you do it properly. Now, I often focus a bit more on the physical components of training. However, for the 90-degree eccentric isometrics method, the mental component is just as important. And there are several reasons for that. First off, we already mentioned that giving maximal exertion and maximal effort on every rep is absolutely critical for mastering our movement and having the optimal form. However, when we go back to the elements and topic of proprioception and sense of feel, this plays a key role for our mental engagement, because essentially what we want to do is we want to be in tune with what our body is telling us the entire time. That's for every second of every rep. We want to be tuning in to that sense of feel, that proprioception, or that kinesthetic awareness. What is my body telling me about my positioning? That is a very intense and very mentally engaging experience. When you contrast that to traditional training, which is often a very mentally complacent, and to be quite frank, it's kind of a mentally or brain dead experience of training. With this, it's a very mentally exhausting and very mentally exerting type of training. So we just went over a lot of information in this video and a lot of different cues and tips on how to perform this 90-degree eccentric isometric method. But one thing that I want to point out, and it's pivotal for finding your form and optimizing your technique, especially if you have any doubts about how to do these exercises, is that when it's done right, when you have the perfect posture, when you have full body tension, when you find that first natural stopping point, essentially what's going to happen is you're going to feel like everything comes together perfectly and it's going to click into place, and it's going to feel like this puzzle just comes together very naturally. There won't even be any doubt in your mind that you did or didn't do it correctly. You'll know right away because it's going to fit so perfectly together. Again, just like that perfect puzzle coming together. Now, I've mentioned several times in this video that even early on during my PhD, I was in this search or this quest for what I considered was going to be the holy grail of fitness or strength training, and in search of that perfect repetition, that perfect training protocol. And I can honestly say that I feel like I've found it, or as close to it as possible. And so I can continue to tell you this until I'm blue in the face. I can continue to try to promote it and tell you that this is the best method out there. But until you try it for yourself, until you give it an honest attempt for at least a few weeks and just go through this protocol and try it on various exercises, you won't be convinced until you try it. Because once you try it, I can almost guarantee you, you're never going to want to go back to traditional training, because the results from this 90-degree eccentric isometric method will blow you away. Now, if you go to my website, I've got tons of free content, hundreds of free articles, lots of different training programs you can use that are free. I also have my book, Movement Redefined, that goes into a lot more detail about all of these concepts. So if you need more help on this, check those out on my website at advancedhumanperformance.com.